our calendar, a few OSINT tools, and some tweets on the overview of the situation in Ukraine. We'll begin shortly. Nice to see you, All Source. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Michael.
Yeah, looking forward to the conversation.
Hi, All Source. Nice to see you.
Can you hear me well?
Yep, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, it's just gone 9 o'clock, so I will get started with tonight's space. Thanks very much for joining us. I think we have an interesting set of topics to run through tonight, and I really appreciate that we're being joined tonight by our guest, All Source News, who we're going to chat about his work in tracking the activity of the cartels, which is a unique form of open source intelligence work. We often talk about Ukraine, but obviously these same techniques can be applied to tracking events in all sorts of contexts. So I think that's going to be a great conversation. All Source is a really dynamic speaker, so looking forward to that. Just to explain the background of the space, this space is designed to both promote good open source analysis, to allow the audience to learn some techniques, not only to do your own research, but maybe more relevantly, as you're scrolling through Twitter or you're finding news on whatever platforms you're searching, how to evaluate what's correct, how to go out and source, how to double check things, all of those sorts of techniques. So to that end, we're hoping to build up a bit of a community. There we go. Sorry, just adding OPSEC here as a co-host. We're hoping to build a bit of a community in understanding these techniques. I'm going to begin by laying out a couple of resources that are handy. I'm going to do a quick update.
Michael, I don't know if anybody's speaking, but I can't hear anybody. Can you just give me another comm check?
Jacoby, am I coming through okay?
I can hear Michael just fine. I can hear All Source, but I don't think All Source can hear any of us.
I can hear you.
Oh.
Maybe you could just ask All Source to cycle up and down.
All Source, can you just cycle up and down? Because I think Michael can't hear you at all, or you can't.
Yeah, I'm gonna drop. Give me a second.
Okay.
I'll come right back.
Thanks.
Yeah, live audio, guys. These things happen, but we'll get him back in just a moment. So I'm going to run through some resources. Then I'm going to follow up on some of the issues that we discussed in our last spaces, including a few developments in Bakhmut, the attack on the A-50 electronic warfare plane in Belarus, and on some developments in Turkish politics that are relevant to the developments in the war as well. Okay, great. And we have All Source back. Just do a quick
sorry about that.
comms check. Perfect. No problem. Thanks to you. So sorry, we'll run through resources and tools, then we'll just do follow-up on some of the topics that we covered in past spaces. We'll have our conversation with All Source, then we'll go to a roundtable on a couple of topics that I've lined up. There is an agenda. I will put it in the nest, and below that agenda, if you click through it, there is quite a long thread with all the sources of the subjects that we're going to discuss tonight. So if you're curious, if you want to read ahead, get inspired for any questions, you can check it out. The link to that thread is now in the nest. And if at any point, including when I go into the tools here or the follow-up, if anything inspires you, you have a question, or you'd like to add to the conversation, please just request a mic and we'll bring you up to chat. If as we're going along through the discussion, you're enjoying what you're hearing, please do retweet the space. The button for that is in the bottom right of the Spaces window. We'd like to get as many voices into the conversation as we can. I like to begin just running through or familiarizing you guys with the calendar that we're developing. I'm wondering, Jacoby, would you be willing to take maybe just a minute to speak to that and any events you think might be particularly interesting?
Sure, no problem. Actually, I was just going to put a little something into the nest that might be of interest to people as I'm talking about it. You'll see in front of the nest that there's a post with a video on it, and it's just to show, if you're interested, the calendar that we have that we put together, and there's also a link to that calendar in that post, but it's also a link that is in Michael's agenda. And if you open that up, you can see the calendar in a weekly view, and that there's green and purple and blue items there, and those will be the colors that you see, and the green items are events that are outside of Twitter. They're lectures, conferences, and you'll see that there's live links there that when you hover over the green, they open up, and you can just tap on the link there and access them that way. Purple items are Twitter spaces that are organized by friends of ours, and also people that we may not know, but the spaces might be of interest to people that frequent our spaces. And the blue items are usually spaces that are organized by people that often are frequenting these spaces, people who are here now. And so what's great about this calendar is that you can go back and forth if you've missed something that's on there. The links will still be live, and you can grab onto one of the links and then check out to see if the event has been recorded. And usually it has been. A couple that I would highlight just for us today. There was an event yesterday with Bellingcat that it's every Wednesday. It's a weekly talking news and tools resource where you have Giancarlo Fiorella, who goes through a number of resources that they are sharing with people on their Twitch live feed. And you can catch that around 11:30 every Wednesday Eastern Standard Time. There's another event at the Lowy Institute, an Australian think tank, that was earlier today. You'll find that on our calendar. You'll find also on the calendar tonight, it started at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, our friend Andrew Perpetua, who was here last week. He has his Ukraine battlefield update. Tonight he has Constantine on, friend of our space also, and he's going to be speaking with a drone pilot who fought in a few of the battles on the ground there, so that should be pretty interesting. And if you miss it because you're here partaking in this space, which we hope you stay for, you can always go back to the item on the calendar and grab his Twitch feed. That'll be up there as a recording, but right now it's live. And so one other thing I would mention on the calendar is an event tomorrow with the Hudson Institute. It's a think tank as well. It's a discussion with a member of Congress on the last Congress's budget for Ukraine defense, and a discussion about future support in the current 118th Congress that might be of interest to people in the space. So check that out. Again, it's in the calendar, and there's a link inside if you just hover right over it. And hopefully that will be helpful to you. If you have any other items that you don't see on the calendar and you think that people in this space would be interested in something you know about or would like to share, please do DM me or Michael or anybody you may know that's associated with the space, and we'll try and get it onto the calendar as well. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Jacoby. Yeah, the Spaces search feature is not very good, and there are so many great events that we just thought it would be handy for people to have both internal Twitter Spaces that are sort of grouped by theme and external spaces all in one spot. So do check that out. I wanted to highlight for you guys a couple of interesting tools that came across my feed this week. These items are all up in the nest. I'm just going to speak to them in order. The first is a thread. It's actually a re-up or a retweet by Istabarat, who is quite a good ship tracker. He does great work tracking shipments from Iran, and lately a lot of that is shipments of weapons or other material support from Iran to Russia. But a year ago, he put together a guide on how to geolocate locations that were in mountainous areas, which I'll admit is not, it's so advanced that it's something I have never had to attempt myself. But I know that there are particular software tools that sort of evaluate the heights of different peaks and so on. So I think he walks you through some of those tools. Check that out if you're working on any geolocation. Before continuing, Piotr, thanks for joining us. Go ahead.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, look forward to what you guys are going to talk about. Look forward to hearing from all sorts. So I highly recommend the Lowy Institute one. Catch the replay. Lowy Institute, great organisation. Worked with them before, and do some interesting stuff from the xenocentric or like xeno-focused perspective. And the second, I have put it in the comments with your willingness, Michael. I'll put it in the nest. But an event for Sunday. Obviously, I hope you and Jacoby can co-host or anyone can join. But the Zaporizhzhia power plant, the comments by the IEAA, or however the bloody pronunciation is, UN group basically, and just general instability around the power plant put me in touch with a couple of people, specifically one chap called Mark Nelson, who you may have seen. He's a cool guy. Who's got a stosh in his picture. He's a radio, and he's part of Radiant Energy Fund or something. But I've seen him in other places before, so we're going to have a chat with him on Sunday, probably, and a couple of colleagues about the Zaporizhzhia power plant. So if you guys want to join for that, we'll have it. It's not going to be nuclear weapons. It's the power plant. It's Zaporizhzhia. It's the energy grid. Nuclear fallout, that sort of thing. So if you're interested in that, then please, RSVP for the event in the nest. But thank you.
Yeah, that sounds great. When I do plan to join you, and Mark is a really great speaker. When I saw your invite for that go out, I actually took it and I sent it along, and so it should actually be incorporated in our little calendar as well. But everybody, if you're interested in following developments in nuclear power, particularly in Ukraine, on the weekend, set your reminders now. Continuing on through a few of these resources. Oh, maybe before I continue, Jacoby, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring attention to the YouTube feed. If it's easier for people to take a look at that and get the audio through that, you're welcome to do that too. It's the first item in the nest, and then I'll put it down in the replies.
Thanks very much for that. Yeah, these spaces are being streamed. Frankly, we're working up through a learning process with our feeds, so we always appreciate back on how they're coming along. We're getting a new camera tonight, so you can let us know if it looks any better than our past broadcasts. Back in the nest a little bit. I think it's now the fourth item back. Tweet by Joseph Cox. So in addition to newly developed tools, every so often we lose a tool. And so I thought I would just put this up because the Tor Onion service for Twitter, which was rolled out near the beginning of the Russian invasion last year, the full-scale invasion, it's no longer working. I understand that's in connection with the changes that have been made to Twitter API that prevent the level of access for free that was necessary for that Onion service to work. For those who don't know, Tor, I can't recall if Tor is the protocol or the browser, but it is an anonymous browsing service. And so when it's running, it obfuscates your location so that people from countries where they're prohibited from visiting certain sites, whether it be Wikipedia or various open source sites, they can reach them anonymously, and it's much harder for them to be tracked when they're using that kind of a browser. And people could access Twitter using that kind of service for about a year, but apparently that's no longer working. And I haven't heard whether there's any intention for Twitter to restore it. I understand from this article that they weren't intending to take it down, or they had said we intend for it to stay up, but it appears that's not what's happened. So keep your eyes on this space in the event that they restore it in the next couple of weeks. Two more tools. This one's actually before I go along, go ahead, Piotr.
Well, I just wanted to say, I intend to stick to cups of tea and coffee, but then I end up having 2 pints of beer and a glass of whiskey. So we can all intend to stay in one pathway, but then do another. So I just wanted to add that liberty in there.
Yeah, and
we not an alcoholic, I promise.
No, but it does seem like Musk's approach has been to move quickly and sort of move quickly and break things, maybe fail quickly. I don't know that he's recovering as quickly as he would like, but we can all hope that it does seem like with some of the changes to the API, there was a bit of an uproar from the research community. And while I understand that the academic programs and exemptions that they will allow to continue are not as significant as the community really needs, but I understand there has been a little bit of flexibility on Twitter's end. And so I would suggest that if it affects you, keep pushing, because continued pressure seems like it does sometimes have an effect, even on Twitter's, or even on Musk's Twitter. So 2 more tools. The first is actually a thread. It's the 5th back in the nest now. It's the tweet by Cyber Detective. Great account to follow. This account, it's constantly highlighting OSINT tools. And in this case, it's a thread that has been developed for how to deal with video presentations in a foreign language, which is super helpful. I've read through the thread. I haven't had an opportunity to test out any of the tools yet. But I know that at the moment, I am at the mercy of how quickly YouTube generates its auto captions whenever I want to listen to a Ukrainian or Polish or Russian press conference. And so hopefully, if I follow a few of the steps laid out in this thread, I'll be able to decipher them that much more quickly. The last tool, 6th tweet back in the nest, it's by Brady Afric. We had a conversation briefly about this maybe 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and it's this technique whereby if you're using synthetic aperture radar, synthetic aperture radar imagery, usually from a satellite, it generates these strange interference patterns on the map when the radar waves from the satellite create this interference pattern, often with radar waves from ground-based radar, which is this interesting effect that allows people looking at satellite imagery to detect the location of some types of ground-based radar. And we had some people in the space who are quite familiar with these techniques who discussed them a little bit, and I knew that there was a write-up. I just didn't have it at my fingertips at the time, and helpfully Brady has retweeted it. Brady does a lot of work with satellite imagery. And so if you want a more fulsome explanation for how that technique works, you can go and check it out. It's a write-up by Bellingcat. All right, so that's it for tools. I just wanted to take maybe 10 minutes before we get to our interview with AllSource to discuss some follow-up on subjects that we discussed in past spaces. So the first I'm going to put up, this is just the overview thread. It is an update on Turkish politics. So I'll quickly run through these points. If any of these catch your attention, you know, I'd invite you to add a little bit of commentary. That always makes the space a little bit more interesting. So the first is that there have been ongoing meetings between Turkish diplomats and both Finnish and Swedish diplomats regarding those countries' accession to NATO. And in this thread, there was an interview given by one of the Turkish diplomats. It was the Turkish presidential spokesman, Kalin, who said that it's the Turkish government does not intend to pursue approval of accession for Sweden until at least June the 1st, because that's the date when some new anti-terror legislation in Sweden comes into effect. And that was one of the requests of Turkey. And I suppose they're essentially saying, you know, show me the money before they proceed with their approvals. And so that gives us a timeline. I can remember, I'm old enough to remember a time when we were hopeful that a session might happen by the summer of last year. And now we're talking about the summer of this year at the earliest. But that is the latest on that point. Piotr, go ahead.
Yeah, you know, I don't want to interject every single time, but as this is probably where I'm going to speak the most and then have to put up with listening to all sorts for an hour. You know, look, I think we need to keep this in mind that this summer I still think is even a bit of a stretch. I'm not entirely sure that the Turkish really are the problem anymore. It's more the Hungarian government and Viktor Orban. But I'm not trying to open that tangent. It's more just a case of, you know, Finland has been unfairly tagged on in this whole matter just because they're like, oh, you both want to join? Screw it. We'll just put you in the same clump. And basically, you know, Sweden is 90% of the problem here. And, you know, the Turks don't really have any issue with the Finns at all. They don't have legislation and, you know, their unwillingness to change their recognition of PKK members, right? So, and then the last point is just also keep in mind also what happens after May. We know the result of the Turkish election. So I think that the Turkish, for one, want to leverage this for diplomatic optics to try and make Erdogan look like a, you know, decisive diplomat or person who's able to dictate, you know, countries that threaten Turkey's national security, i.e. Sweden, over the PKK. But second, also because they just don't need the headache. They just want this to be out of the way or at least postponed until they've dealt with the domestic situation. Erdogan's screwed up over the provision of safety laws and humanitarian supplies because of the earthquake. He doesn't need this added element. So, you know, I would keep those factors in mind as we look ahead to Turkey in the next few weeks and months.
That's a great point, and that's a lead-in to, I believe the election is now scheduled for May the 14th. So, as you say, we hopefully will know the results of the election prior to that Swedish anti-terror law coming into force. The other developments I've put up in the nest. When we spoke on Sunday, we were still in the midst of a political crisis in the opposition coalition, where the second largest of the coalition members had come out and said that they had selected the leader of the largest party to be their coalition candidate. And then the second biggest party came out and said, well, we don't support that. They preferred, the second biggest party said they preferred that the mayor of Istanbul or the mayor of the Turkey's second largest city, Ankara, one of them should be the candidate, in their opinion. and they didn't say or else, but it was unclear what the implications were. And my understanding is that in polling at the moment, when taken as a united coalition, they are actually polling ahead of Erdogan's party. But if the coalition were to fracture, that would become pretty uncertain. Since Sunday's development, though, they reached a deal whereby each of these mayors of Istanbul and Ankara would be the vice presidents behind the leader of the largest party. And that was agreeable to everybody. The second largest coalition member has now fallen back into line, and they are once again presenting a united front. Piotr, go ahead.
Yeah, I was reading an article on this, so I can directly speak to it very quickly. No, Jay says I'm not in the bath, so I was in the bathroom, but not in the bath. I've disconnected also my shitty, cheap Wi-Fi headphones, but hopefully this acoustic is better for you. But yeah, so there's 6 opposition parties where they were in agreement over the candidate, which is the head of Kilisaroglu. He's a 74-year-old economist, not particularly charismatic, if you ask me, and he's a bit of a safe bet. You know, he'd be someone who would try and unite a lot of people and bring the country together, sort of under one banner, right? After Erdogan's many years of division and problematic policies. But then, Michael, you're referring to. He's the leader of the opposition's main nationalist bloc, and he's a bit younger, and he's much more like, you know. But all this is a return to the table for and crisis averted. The opposition again, united behind. I'm just going to call him Killy. Because if these people cannot get their shit together and determine which person they want, the safer older dude or the slightly nationalistic, younger, charismatic one. Well, you're just going to, with the old, not particularly charismatic, but definitely nationalistic, neo-Ottomanistic Erdogan. So, you know, again, this may be a case of Erdogan doesn't do anything particularly useful. He simply just benefits from the inability of the opposition to get their act together, which we've seen how many times playing out in other countries around the world in recent years. So.
And so further to that, the second item in the nest is a profile of Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, who is the coalition candidate. He may be the one to unseat Erdogan. And so if you would like to know a little bit more about him personally, there's a profile up there. Interesting development just today. Apparently, a Turkish court came down and said that they were going to free up government-provided campaign funds for the pro-Kurdish party, and apparently they are not in. My understanding is they're not one of the 6 members in the coalition, but they will also support the coalition. It had been anticipated they would not get access to government funding, which is apparently significant, but given this new court decision, they will have that, so the coalition gets that much stronger. In one other development today, Turkey also announced that they were going to be closing several loopholes regarding the transit of sanctioned goods through the Turkish Straits, which was unexpected. And so there was a bit of a scramble to understand what was happening. It was reported from Russian sources initially. It's not clear how broad this is. You know, there is controversy over shipping of weapons and shipping of stolen Ukrainian grain and so on through the Turkish Straits. It seems like the closing of these loopholes probably applies more to basic sanctioned goods and may not stop arms shipments, because the Russian arms shipments from Syria and other places into the Black Sea, but still taking an additional step against Russia's interests is an interesting new development. But I see that Exit's put her hand up, and I think she can probably speak to this. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I'll put it up in the nest, but I just did a thread on this.
Can I just interrupt you? I'm so sorry. For a housekeeping item, Michael, I just wanted to let you know that Allsource has sort of a limited window this evening. He just let us know. And if you could cycle OPSEC down and back up, he has a little technical glitch. Sorry.
Thanks for notice on both those things. I'll take care of those. Go ahead, Exit.
Just really quickly, I did reach out to some people in Turkey, and they're quite certain that Secretary Blinken's visit to Turkey in February likely helped this along, and I will share the thread in the nest. At the very bottom of my thread is an interview with Jorik Jesik that you'll be able to listen to if you scroll straight to 29 minutes. And this was long ago, it actually kind of mentions some of the trade issues that they've had already, and where he kind of thought that would all head.
Well, it's great that you looked at this today. We'll look forward to that in the nest. So we've cycled OPSEC. Did you want to come in?
I was going to, but I know AllSource has a limited amount of time, so by all means, let's start the interview.
Absolutely. So AllSource, I had thought I might start with just an easy question. If you had to propose just 3 simple points to entirely solve the cartel violence problem, what would those 3 points be?
Oh wow, Michael! If I get that right,
yeah, right. I'm just joking. Well, maybe we'll build up to that. What I was actually thinking about starting with was, you and I chat sometimes, and you recently did great coverage of the arrest of Ovidio Guzman, and the outbreak of violence that had very little precedent in Culiacan, Mexico. Just to kind of set the tone, when something like that happens, what kind of a scramble are you in? Like, do you drop everything and then you focus on that, or are you doing this as a side hobby and you just have to make time for it when you're able to? How does that happen when something big and breaking comes through?
So no lie, so this is a hobby of mine. But when the Culiacanazo happened, when Ovidio Guzman was captured, I was at work and I was like, right, I had my phone. Like, yeah, I'm totally working. And I was just consumed by it. I was absolutely consumed. What I would say is, so the term Culiacanazo, and I did a Substack on this, actually prior to Ovidio Guzman capture. And the term Culiacanazo came up after 2018 when the first attempt to capture Ovidio Guzman. But it's not something rare. It's not common, I think, as a term, but it's not rare. Generally, cartels do these types of actions when, and I'm, you know what, I'm getting a lot of people. Are you guys hearing?
No, your audio is pretty bad, man. I can't hear you very well.
Bad?
I don't know if it's just me.
Well,
It sounds like you might have a little bit of wind background.
Okay, hold on. Give me 1 second. Is this better?
It sounds like there's less wind in the background. So let's just keep going. And if there's a problem, we'll let you know.
I had to step. Yeah, sorry.
So AllSource, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you, but whatever.
So the issue that
Sure.
I would say is that Culiacan is not. I'm going to do this. I don't want to hang. Keep on with your open source discussion. Let me get back inside. Let me get to a better area, and I'll jump back in. I didn't know the wind was so bad. Let me get back, and you continue on. Let me cycle out, and I'll get back into you. I'm so sorry.
Yep, no problem. We'll do that. So OPSEC, you did have your hand up. Did you want to touch on something related to the Turkish political issue?
Yes, I was just going to say I'm not sure, and just to go back to this, the fact that Finland and Sweden have sort of created this joint accession process for NATO, as well as we have the holdout Turkey, and then Hungary as well. So what I was going to say is I'm not sure it's necessarily fair to Finland to say that they're being held hostage or anything like that. I think the whole idea behind this bid is, by doing a joint bid, there's a sense of unity. And I think people who are following sort of Turkey and some of the issues that they've already raised with Sweden, probably realize that that might pose some problems. And so I think that sense of unity through that joint bid is, intentional. The other thing is, I think with Hungary and Turkey, as long as there are two states that haven't fully ratified and put this proposal forward, they can kind of use each other as a foil. But as soon as one falls, as soon as one goes through with it, I think it's going to be much more difficult to be that last state, especially if it's a place like Hungary that is the holdout.
I agree, and I was following the developments in Hungary debating the accession last week. I heard them kick the can to this week. I haven't heard anything coming out this week. Have you heard anything from Hungary, OPSEC, in the last few days?
So my understanding is that there has been a directive to support the ascension from Orban to his party, but it doesn't seem quite as declarative or as binding as you would hope, because he also acknowledged that, well, I understand there are also people in my party who have issues with that, and telling them by all means voice those issues. So I haven't heard anything in the last few days, but it's definitely not a done deal.
Yeah, the other day we briefly discussed it, both that directive that you referred to that was tentative support, but then also speculation from Western political analysts that Hungary may try to use it to trade approval of the accession against some financial developments that they'd like to see in their membership with the European Union, even though they're NATO and the EU are not the same. That they may try to trade one on the other, but I haven't actually heard them make that kind of pitch yet. It's just anticipated. Piotr, did you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, sorry, just giving all sorts some shit. Yeah, no, I just think to the OPSEC's point, I mean, look, this mutually sort of, I don't know if beneficial is the right word, but mutually agreed upon sort of thing that the two would enter together. It's powerful, it's symbolic, it's meaningful, it sends a message, because obviously Finland, with its historical association to Russia and its border and what it means for Russia's general sort of embarrassment globally, because Putin wanted to see NATO retract and diminish, and yet it's getting bigger. But in practicality senses, it doesn't make as much sense. Moreover, I would emphasize that at the time there was a sort of sense that the Swedes would join if Finland joined, or whatever. It was that way around. If you looked at polls, Finland, joining increased the Swedish population's intent, sort of support for joining as well by around 10 to 12%. Some sort of 55 to sort of 61%, I believe, reading one poll. So there was that incentivization to get Sweden more on board with it as well, particularly given that they're a particularly large economy and got some, useful interoperability that could help with the alliance. But as this stands, it's a continuous blockade, and maybe it's better for Finland just to go individually at the moment. But again, I do think that Finland is a proper issue. Hungary is a sustained issue as well. So I'm not so worried about Turkey as I am Hungary.
Well, that's just one of what seems like is shaping up to be, more than a dozen global hotspot issues. But we have been rejoined by All Source.
Okay, how do you have me now, Michael? You got me better now?
That is the best I have ever heard you, All Source. So
okay, so you notice I've never used Bluetooth audio again. Headphones. I don't know why Twitter Space and phones don't work that well with it, but I think that was the issue.
No worries. But we were trying to imagine a day in the life of All Source when all hell has broken loose in cool Yukon. And so you said you were consumed by it. So what did you do first when news like that breaks? Do you quickly run to Telegram, or where are you getting your data?
Yeah. So when news like that breaks, it's it's definitely Telegram, right? I mean, and so one of the beauties of Mexico when you track it, right, both in Telegram and Twitter, is the number one issue is that you have, because there's so much violence, unfortunately, that is rampant in Mexico, that is impossible to track on your own. Even a major account that just focuses generally in Mexico, what you have is regional Telegram and Twitter accounts that focus on a specific region on Twitter and Telegram in Mexico. So those are the accounts that then you just try to find and go to and utilize as a source. And then that kind of gets widespread. So when the Culiacanazo happened in Ovidio Guzman, I mean, most of it was actually, ironically, what I used a lot was not only Telegram and Twitter, but also Instagram. And what I did in Instagram was there was initial reports that the airport was stormed. And this was early in the morning. And I remember the videos that were being shared rang the bell. Like I was like, dude, I remember seeing this video somewhere in the past. I don't think this is recent. And what I did is I went to Instagram, literally just put Culiacan International Airport, clicked on it, stories from people who geolocated, their stories just like everybody else. And it showed normal operating procedure. Even somebody posted a picture and said, hey, those reports are false. I'm here. I'm good. So I kept an eye on that guy. And literally, maybe 30 minutes later, an hour later, he uploaded a video. All hell broke loose. They're going after the airport. Remember, I screen recorded his Instagram story like a second he uploaded it. And I shared it on my Twitter. And then from my Twitter feed, that it kind of like, then I started to see the video I recorded because I forgot to crop out the time. Like I just posted it automatically. I didn't crop anything else. I was like, oh, look, that's me. That's because that's my time and when I recorded it. Haha, look at that. But it was great because then that was a tool I used. So it was Instagram, Facebook, social media, Telegram, and Twitter were the main avenues that I utilized for Culiacan. But it was very consuming. There were so many reports that it was just absolutely impossible to keep track of them all. And I know Austin, I don't know if he's here, I don't think he's here, but Austin and I were kind of joking like, Jesus, this is like drinking from a fire hose. This is too much. And what I would say is the severity of Culiacan is unique, is not very common, but the concept of Culiacanazo, of doing narco blockades, burning roads, burning vehicles, blocking cities, that unfortunately is not rare, right? And generally happens when cartels go after the Mexican military government goes after kind of somewhat senior leaders of the cartel. And that's generally a TTP that we've seen cartels revert back to, is the burning of the vehicles, businesses, and all hell break loose. Because what they're trying to do is force the government to stop and release the leader or enable the leader to escape because all hell broke loose. That actually happened in August of 2022. There was a report that a very senior CJNG cartel leader, he was the leader of one of the factions of CJNG called Grupo Elite, elite group is the translation. His nickname is Doble R, so double R. And there was reports, the first thing we noticed was kind of in Guanajuato, one of the states, and kind of Jalisco, reports of multiple cars burning, roads, highways being blocked. And that meant, okay, somebody senior is getting targeted. Automatically, all Mexico watchers know if there's multiple cities, something major. And effectively, multiple states, they were very close to capturing him, but he managed to escape. Because the Mexican security forces were so consumed by those incidents that they kind of they didn't know what was going on. It looks like in Culiacanazo, when they got Ovidio Guzman, they were better.
So, all source, if you can hear me, I think we lost you about 10 seconds ago.
Oh, I muted.
Yeah, no problem. You're excited. You probably hit the button. So you were just saying that all these reports were coming in from Culiacan, and then what happened?
Yeah, so the reports started coming in, and what I would say is that the Mexican government this time was a lot better prepared for this incident. Unlike in the past, they clearly knew that when they did this operation, that they were expecting this to happen. They knew the cartels were going to respond to it, that the cartels were going to burn the city down. And they were, and the Mexican government was actually anticipating it, and they were better prepared. And that's why they successfully managed to capture the El Chapo Guzman's son and extradite him back to Mexico City.
And so that's why you should follow all sources, because every so often something, breaking and exciting happens, and he will definitely be on top of that subject. Your description of dealing with the Culiacan breaking news raised a ton of questions I'm interested in. I was thinking maybe we could go back sort of to the beginning, though. You track the cartels. I know that occasionally you'll speak to developments around Latin America when there was the attempted coup in Peru and when there was some unrest in Brazil and so on. But are you focused on cartels just in Mexico? And just in case you're muted, you're not coming through at the moment. So it looks like AllSource may be having some technical problems. We'll just give him a second. If I'm the one who's not hearing him, perhaps somebody can just let me know.
No, we can't hear him. It's not just you.
Michael, can you hear me now?
You're back now, yes.
God
so
damn it, no, one day I finally have a cartel space and my phone and internet connection is just going to shit. I don't know why.
Do you know what the beautiful thing is, though? These spaces are held Thursday nights, Sunday afternoons. This doesn't have to be your one-time.
There's your plug-in. There it is.
So are you, when you're dealing with the cartel, are you focused in Mexico, or are you looking at their activities abroad? Are you looking at some of their activities in the US?
So 90% of my focus is in Mexico, but I do track them in Latin America and in the United States. Yes, I do track them kind of widespread. But let's be real, the most you will ever see them is in Mexico proper. So that's why the vast majority of my focus is in Mexico. And there's other accounts that do very good jobs tracking Mexican cartels throughout South America. One of them would be Insight Crime. Insight Crime is a great news organization that does amazing analysis on Mexican cartels throughout the world and in South America. And then, and I know, Michael, you're in that group chat. Borderland Beat, the guy that I brought into one of our chats, El Guaso, he's a contributor there. Borderland Beat also does very great analysis. Most of the reporting is also centered in Mexico, but they provide a lot of the deep-seated analysis that somebody like myself, who does this more part-time, I focus more on kind of like the typical, what you would expect in OSINT, like, hey, this is what's going on. This is what we're seeing, here's the video, here's the media, here's the initial report. It's very hard for me to really then delve into the analysis just myself and my phone, because everything I do on Twitter and in my account is just literally run through my phone.
Yeah, I totally understand that. I ran everything I was doing on Twitter through my phone for the first 10 months or so, and it's only the last couple of months I've broadened my horizons out to a desktop. And so I'd encourage you to consider it, because you get so many more tools. So you're focused on Mexico 90% of the time, and would you say that you are following cartel developments, or do you think you're more focused on cartel violence? Just because that's maybe the most obvious of the type of cartel activity that you can find on social media.
I would say, basically cartel violence. However, I am trying to expand more in the cartel development, but that's harder with the resources I have.
Totally understandable. And it was great to see you branch out, particularly around the Culiacan, violence, because I saw you make connections with a couple of other OSINT accounts. Were you working with Oryx at one point to do an article? All source, just in case you...
DMing each other.
Sorry, I think that's just a little bit of lag. Go ahead. You were working with Oryx?
Yes, because he was doing his vehicle damage assessment, and we were DMing each other, and that's how we got in touch, because I started to send him all the videos, and he was asking me for reports specifically on, hey, is this a duplicate, this angle of the picture? So we were coordinating back and forth because I had all the media from the event that I was able to share to him, and that's how I got into touch with Oryx. But there's a lot of other, like you were saying about the GeoEnt tool, like Peak Finder actually is the tool I've used because of the mountainous areas where a lot of these cartel operates, and actually Aurora Intel was the one who recommended that for me, right? And so I view OSINT as a collaboration, not a competition, and honestly, it's been great linking up with these bigger accounts because it made my work a lot better.
I totally agree on the collaboration, which is why I'm trying to hold these spaces, is to get people with different skills and just interest and, commitment to come together. And we're not necessarily running investigations here, but hoping to put people together so that they can do better work. Okay, so you're often tracking cartel violence. You've done some collaboration with Oryx. I know at that time you were working with Josh a little bit. And by the way, guys, what I'll do is after this, all of these account names that we're referring to, Inside Crime, Borderland Beat, Aurora Intel, and others, I will put in one post so that you can follow them. But I know you worked with Josh a little bit to do some mapping of the series of events. Is that something you think you might try to do more of?
Oh, that was all Josh, by the way. That was like, he did that all on his own. He just grabbed the videos, and I remember he DM'd me private, because I have it open, but I wasn't following anything. And he's like, hey, I used this map, I geolocated all these footages, if you want to share it. And I'm like, dude, you gotta tweet this, you gotta get all the credit. That was 1,000,000% him. He just did that on his own. I just provided the content, and him on his own geolocated every single one of it, which was amazing, because then that enabled very in-depth conversation, and it actually allowed us to kind of confirm some of the reporting we were getting of how the sicarios of the Sinaloa cartel were how they were operating, because we were getting reports that they attacked from the north. We kind of saw the areas where Culiacan was getting hit the most, which is more in the northwestern sector, and that kind of backed up the reports of where their avenue of approach, where they kind of got from, their base of operation. And so his ability to geolocate every single one of those footages that I provided on his own accord, I take no credit, I want no credit for that, was amazing, and it provided that much better understanding of the situation. I tried to make sure that a lot of his information was shared with a lot of the, because I have other Twitter group chats that I'm in that that focus on cartel activity and Latin America affairs, and just bringing him into that really enriched the conversation a lot more.
Yeah, it's great when people can build out or collaborate, as we're talking about, to build a better overall product. And now that you have built that connection with Josh, hopefully as things develop, you guys might get back together. And for example, I've been thinking about, in connection with the war in Ukraine, we have translators, we have mappers, we have investigators, people who specialize in military hardware. Do you see that whole breadth of OSINT in connection with cartel research? Because I know you've talked about some of these guys like Inside Crime and El Huaso who are doing some in-depth work, but do you see this a similar breadth to what you see in connection with Ukraine?
So yes, I think the issue though you're going to run into is language barrier, right? Because a lot of these are just purely Spanish, right? So in the Mexican OSINT community, the Mexican journalist community is very rich, very in-depth. It's just that language barrier to break through, and the fact that there wasn't that focus. And I'll put it like this, Michael. Like, one of the things I've been trying to expand on is Brazilian gang violence, and specifically Rio de Janeiro and across Brazil, because I believe very very firmly that Brazilian gangs have the potential to actually become, if not as powerful, close to powerful as Mexican cartels within the next decade. Like, they have all the potential to be as powerful. The issue I run into is I don't speak Portuguese. I don't speak Portuguese. And so that is a language barrier. So I think that's for everybody else. Like there's so much, that's why I created my account. And I remember Spook once, I was talking to Spook and he said, "Oh, you're a great OSINT account for Mexico." And I kind of told him, the tools is not all me. Most of it is from other accounts. And he kind of said, "Well, you're kind of that bridge." And that's kind of what I view myself as, that bridge from what's going on in Mexico further down, to the kind of the wider, quote unquote, at least English community. And if there's anybody here who speaks Portuguese, I highly encourage you, focus on Brazilian. If you're passionate about gang violence, focus on Brazilian gang violence, translate it to English, have a better understand, make us better understand the situation on the ground, and reach out to me, because I would gladly love to explode your account, because I think that's something that in Brazil is very focused. I just don't speak Portuguese, so it's very hard for me to really get in depth. But if you do, and there is a lack, I'd love it.
Well, there you go. And I know that we have, in these spaces, been in touch with a couple of reporters from Brazil, some sort of young up-and-comers. So if they're not in the space tonight, I'll make sure to pass that message on, because that's a great invitation to collaborate and promote. I know there are hands up and that your time is limited. So I'm going to ask you maybe 2 more questions. Then we'll go to a handful of audience questions if you still have a few minutes. That means that if you're in the audience and you want to ask Allsource about his work, maybe we won't get into the politics of it or specific events at this point, but if you'd like to chat with him about his process, please do request a mic. We'll bring you up to get you into the conversation. So why did you get started with this? What motivates you to be interested in this work that I'm sure can be graphic and unpleasant, and it keeps you up at odd hours following developments around the world?
So I would say I think I kind of got an immunity to graphic content because I deployed to the Middle East in the Army, and one of the things we were monitoring was ISIS propaganda videos. So it just became natural, and I have no problem saying this. I think cartels are worse than ISIS in the videos that I've seen. I have yet to see anything quite similar to what I have seen the cartels do, and I'm not going to go into details. It's just not worth it. But the reason why I got kind of passionate was 2 things. One, I got exposure to the Mexican military in my time in the Army, training with them and just connections with them. I have family from Mexico. So there's also that my mother's Mexican, so I had that family connection. And what I noticed is because of that, I deployed to the border also as in the Army. What I noticed was nobody was talking about it in kind of like the greater OSINT community. Like there would be massive events that go on. I'm like, why isn't nobody talking about this? And so I saw an opening and I said, well, and I thought to myself, well, why don't I do it? And literally that's how I jumped in. Created my account in March of 2021. Was fortunate that I started to just get into connections with other accounts. I think the first one I really got into that kind of focused on Ukraine when everything was building up was Intel Hub, then through him with OSINT Defender, and that's just kind of how it expanded. And but I just saw an opportunity, and I decided early on that regardless what happened in the world, my focus was primarily 95% of my time would be on Mexican cartels from a Twitter feed. And then my ability to cover Ukraine and other geopolitics issue OSINT accounts would be through Spaces or maybe a thread here and there.
That's, as good a reason as any, as it's a subject that needs attention, and you had the means and the interest. I agree that it probably still remains an underserved field. So if anybody listening would like to get into it and work with Allsource, I think there's still lots of opportunity there. So last question from me, Allsource. Given that it is a field that perhaps isn't as focused on, particularly in English, and that you get a lot of your information from social media, potentially from cartel members themselves, how do you vet things? Or I understand it's not always possible, but what kind of standard do you have in mind for, if I'm going to repeat this, I'm going to put this out there? How do you get enough confidence that that something is worth putting out, whether you're saying, I think this has happened, this is true, or saying, hey, I don't know if this is true, but it's newsworthy, people should dig into it more. How do you make those decisions?
It's hard, Mike. I mean, and one of the things, like, if anybody wants to create an OSINT account, you're going to make mistakes, and that's fine. That's expected. Own it, and, you know, continue on. I know we've talked about it. I actually rely heavily on my followers. If I see like 10 comments, hey, this is an old video, or that's not true, I'm like, oh, hey, thanks for letting me know. I appreciate it. Sometimes people tell me that a certain video might be fake, and then I like respond like, no, I know this is true because here's my proof, and it's fine. I mean, I have thick skin, and I appreciate everybody's feedback because in the end of the day, it makes me better. I want to be better at what I do. I don't want to be. I'm never going to be perfect. I just want to be better. And I kind of take a journalistic standard in the sense, if I can make a mistake, I want people to understand that I'm not hiding it. Here's my mistake, and thank you for the corrections. There are accounts that I kind of blacklist. Not blacklist. Let me rephrase that. So there's certain sources that I'm always skeptical when they publish something. But I still need to monitor them because it gives you the frame of mind. And then it's just kind of like a database that I have to try to confirm. But sometimes the issue I run into is, like, I created my account in March of 2021. So I wasn't really tracking this until March of 2021. So that means videos from, let's say, 2018, which there's a lot, I haven't seen it. So I can run into the issue that it might be an old video or old content. And so then it's that balancing act. And maybe it's waiting. If I get if I get a video from my research and some vetted or more reliable account publish that. And then if I see, and that actually happened recently, there was a video of Gulf cartels and the Northeast cartel. There was like both, they had basically technicals and they were firing each other. I wasn't sure when I got that early. I think it was either yesterday or 2 days ago. I got that fairly early. I was like, let me wait. And then I saw a more reputable account publish it. And I was like, okay, this is recent. This is real. It's not fake. Let me publish it. I also rely a lot of, for example, the group chat I have with a lot of the Borderland Beat contributors. Sometimes I'll share content with them. It's like, hey, I saw this. What do you guys think? And same, vice versa. We all share content. And that's the aspect of OSINT collaboration. I think it's important. But Michael, before I finish this point, I think one of the two, I actually want to bring this because this is kind of interesting on OSINT that I discovered while I was covering this. So one of the things I noticed, and I think people don't really understand how cartels operate, they don't hide. Like, they don't, like, they're not like, I would argue ISIS is more secretive. And then what they release, they want people to know they release it. Like, here's a propaganda video. It's been vetted. We want the world. Cartel members don't give a shit. They'll publish whatever the hell they want. And so one of the things I kind of discovered is on Instagram is I started to discover accounts that either are actual, I know, cartel members, or people that publish cartel propaganda very irregularly. And the reason why I discovered it, ironically, was emojis, right? Because they would have a name and then they would have an emoji, and certain emojis are affiliated because they use that in their propaganda videos to identify their faction. So, for example, a perfect example, Los Rusos, right? The translation of Los Rusos means the Russians, right? The Russians, they have no affiliation with the Russian government. They're not pro-Putin, nothing like that. Absolutely not. The reason why they call themselves the Russians is because their leader's nickname is Russo, right? And it's a common nickname. It doesn't mean he's from Russia or anything like that. It's just like there's Mexicans that they just call Chino, which is Chinese. So the leader of this faction of the Sinaloa cartel that is part of the Mayo Zambada faction, Los Rusos, they heavily utilize Russian symbols as an identity mark, heavily. And so if I find a Mexican account with a Russian flag emoji, automatically my mind's like, oh, that guy's interesting to me. Let me check him out. And 9 times out of 10, he's either posting content from those guys, and he might not be reliable, but he's posting contents from them, or I actually find out based on his videos and what he shares and pictures of himself, or maybe he hides his face, but you kind of see a recurring theme of a tattoo or something, like, okay, this guy's an actual cartel member, right? And so emojis was actually, I had a breakthrough in my, about last year in my ability to kind of track cartel members on Instagram, because Meta, by the way, is absolutely terrible and controlling content. they post everything on Meta, I actually was able to find people based on their emoji. So, you know, the Russians, you have Maya Zambada is like the cowboy is a very typical emoji that they utilize. Grupo Flecha, so the arrow group, that's another Maya Zambada faction. They use the bow and arrow. A CJNG group is called Los Jardineros, which is the gardeners. So they have a specific flower emoji that they utilize. And you just kind of run through the list of those emojis. And I made a thread a while ago about kind of laying it out. And I probably have to update it because there's more and more things that I keep on missing. But that actually helps me discover kind of this investigative work. Like, okay, where can I find these guys? Again, a Mexican with a Russian flag, you know, there's, you know, it gets my interest. That's to me as an indicator, like, ooh, let me check this guy out. So I think that's a cool OSINT, something I discovered doing this, realizing because cartel members, like I said, they don't really hide. I will say though, is that ever since Culiacanazo happened, one of the things I noticed, I was tracking a lot of Los Chapitos. Los Chapitos is the Sinaloa cartel faction that was led by El Chapo's son, one of them being Ovidio Guzman. About 2 days after his capture, a lot of those accounts on, especially Instagram, went dark. Some of them not only went dark, they automatically just deleted it, right? So you can kind of see there is some OPSEC they do to control their content because I think they realize, oh fuck, we're kind of screwed because they were talking a lot of Los Chapitos. They were being very bravado that they were going to retaliate, that Culiacanazo was nothing, we're going to do it again. But then 2 days later, so many of the accounts just disappeared, dark. I lost a lot of these guys, and I'm now like I have to kind of redo my Instagram shirt to find people because I just, you know, they just completely went dark. And not only them, even Mayo Zambada, you know, their rivals, the same, because you started seeing Mexican government was going a little bit more heavily on some senior figures of that part of the Sinaloa cartel. And a lot of people who regularly posted content, you can see that they instituted OPSEC and then they just cease producing, right? So so I think that's something from the last year to now, this is the first time I actually see accounts going dark. And maybe it's because of the kind of they're starting to realize like, oh, maybe we can't be this stupid on social media.
So there are so many interesting things in there that we're not going to have a chance to get to in today's conversation. Hopefully you will come back to chat with us down the road. I appreciate Jacoby has put up in the nest all sources thread describing his discoveries with regard to emojis. So if you're interested in that, check that out. In the nest, we also have a link to the Substack article that All Source referred to having written. And so it's this sort of meta, like, how do you do your work stuff that I'm particularly interested in. And so maybe I'll try and get back with you at some point in the next couple of days to see if I can even put together a bit of a thread or help you put one together on if you want to do cartel OSINT, here's how you get started. Or even get a little bit of a list put together just so that, you know, people can start building that curve of who's reliable, you know, that you've already climbed. And I'm sure people would love that. So All Source, I don't know how much time you have. Just let us know when you have to go. There are a bunch of hands because you're a very interesting guy. I'm pretty sure it was Piotr and I think we lost balance. So I think it was Piotr and then ID10T, and then we'll see from there. Go ahead, Piotr.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, you know, I'm going to just also a couple questions for you. So, you know, how much do you feel that the past year, building on Michael's, certain points Michael alluded to, how much do you think that the mainstreamism, I'm just going to make that a word, of OSINT has impacted your work? You know, Latin America broadly is a region that is often forgotten about in geopolitics, and I'm not opening this into geopolitics, but I'm just curious for one question, how you think it's impacted your work, you know, this explosion in terms of OSINT sort of exposure. And second, you know, we've seen, broadly speaking, under President Andres, you know, a growing relationship to the military in a way that he said he wasn't going to do, and the military sort of garnering influence or control over certain pieces like airports and so on that obviously strategically significant if you get into a firefight or something with cartels. So I was just wondering how you think the role of the military that has grown plays into, the acquisition of information, OSINT techniques, whether it's a hindrance, a help, or so on. Just curious how the macro elements play into your sort of micro focus one.
So those are two amazing questions that I do not have the answers to. And in the moment you were speaking, all sources disappeared. Hopefully it's just a technical matter, and maybe he'll come back to answer questions in a moment. In that
I mentioned politics. He doesn't like politics.
The one thing I hear he really doesn't like is conversations about trains for some reason. That's become a theme. But we'll give him a minute to come back. He's a great speaker. Again, because he only had, he said 30, 45 minutes, that might be the end of our time with him. We'll find out. But because he's a friend of the space and he is around often, hopefully we can schedule a conversation with him again, maybe in a couple of weeks, and we'll get a few more questions in. What I would encourage you to do is, if you're one of our friends here who have your hands up, if he doesn't come back, if you would maybe just take a minute to write your question in the replies to the space. That way we'll have a record of them, and we can make sure to get them to him. But we'll take a moment just to maybe go through hands, at least get some of the questions out there, if we can do it quickly. OPSEC, did you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so not so much a question, but just to point out, one of the things that he does love is 50 cal sniper rifles without scopes. So if he does come back, I think that's something that some of the speakers should bring up.
So it seems like we have a lot of people here who have done OSINT about all source as opposed to OSINT with all source. And as funny as that is, hopefully we can get some people inspired to collaborate with him. Oh, here we go. So we'll just take a moment for all source to come up to the stage and for his audio to connect, and then hopefully we can get a few questions.
Michael, I'm so sorry about that. The reason why I didn't have that much time is because I was expecting a call, and right when Piotr was asking a question, I got the call that I had to take. I had to take it. That's what I thought. But you know what? It was a lot quicker than I thought, and it just finished. So I'm back. Or we can just blame Piotr because his voice is very annoying. I'm kidding.
Well, to that end, the punishment then is that he'll have to repeat his question.
Please, Piotr, repeat it, because I didn't hear a single word because somebody called me and I had to answer it. Please go ahead, Piotr.
Hello, yes. With the most annoying accentuation of my accent. No, I won't do that, don't worry. No, I just wondered, so two questions, somewhat unrelated. First one is basically, how much do you think the Ukrainian conflict in of itself and the mainstreamism, as I said before, has played into your work in OSINT? Latin America is a region that's relatively overlooked in geopolitics. But OSINT is obviously a strong role in measuring cartel activity and coercion in certain regions. How much do you think that this, the explosion of people doing OSINT has played into your work, good or bad? And second, President Andreas has obviously reneged on his commitments and made the military quite a lot closer and given them a lot more influence than they've really ever had in Mexican history. And I was just wondering, from your perspective, how do those broader macro elements of sort of the role of the military in controlling certain regions, influencing communications, how much does that influence your ability to ascertain certain information or assess the situation of something to do with the cartels?
So I'm not against the OSINT explosion that happened because of Russia-Ukraine. I mean, I know there's people who obviously criticize it, and I think everybody here, based on your own perspective and knowledge, can make a determination of if it's if that account is worthy. Right. I think that's a personal choice, just as like how people might consume media. It's your personal decision. I know I'm in contact with people that created their accounts because of Russia, Ukraine, and that's totally fine. So if they're good and they're reliable, I reach out to them and we can collaborate. And actually, ironically, what I would consider probably my strongest point is probably providing military analysis in the Russia-Ukraine war because of my background, right? That's actually my strength. I just didn't feel like I wanted to be. I felt like I wanted to focus on the cartel thing because I just felt like it's something I kind of built, and I didn't want to let it go. Not because of anything else, just because I was just so invested in it, and it's something that I passionately want to get more. And I think, Michael, you kind of hit it. I would like to be more on this. Provide more in-depth analysis, and one of my long-term projects is actually to write, an article and maybe get it published somewhere, kind of talking about the cartel war in a way, in kind of like this theory that I have, and more theorized and probably international relations or conflict description, more in depth, because I feel like I hate the term drug war, and I want to explain rationally and logically with research why I don't believe this cartel violence that we're seeing in Mexico can be called a drug war, right? It's something more complex and more convoluted than that. So that's number one. The second thing is, to your second question, right, about Andrés Manuel López Obrador, is kind of ironic, right? But at the same time, if you really delve into his policy, it's not, right? Because so Andrés Manuel López Obrador, for those who don't know, are commonly referred by his acronym AMLO, AMLO. He's a populist, right? He's not left-leaning. I think that's a misconception. He's not. He's a pure populist and very nationalistic. And his campaign promises before he became president was very famous because it was called abrazos no balazos, hugs, not bullets, and the notion of demilitarizing this war. But I think the problem that people realize, and every Mexican administration realizes, that, you can say that as the Mexican government, but the cartels have a voice in that matter, and they might not necessarily agree. And oh, by the way, corruption is very embedded. That it also corrupts the Mexican institutions in of itself. And so what you see is Andrés Manuel López Obrador, AMLO, with this nationalistic idea and populist idea, right? Him representing the people. What do you generally see populist leaders go to as a symbol of populism and national pride? The military. Now, the military has issues of corruptions. But I think there's a general consensus that of all the Mexican corruptions institution is the least corrupt, but that's kind of being like the skinniest kid in fat camp. It doesn't really mean much. And so what you see AMLO doing is utilizing the military as this populist nationalist pride that the Mexican people are very proudful, have a lot of pride in their military, to tackle corruption. But what that means is now that the Mexican military is taking over more and more civilian institutions. So one, you have a degradation of the military-civilian relationship in the Mexican government, which is concerning. Two, the Mexican military is going to get much more political power, which is concerning in the sense of a democratic nation, right? But then three, it's now more susceptible to corruption, right? But at the same time, if you look at it from AMLO's point of view, what else does he got?